We've got people joining. Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. All right, give it just another. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and welcome to our webinar today titled COVID-19 and Disability Insurance. My name is Andrew Wylam, and I'm the president of Pandemic Patients, which is a nonprofit organization that works to relieve the harm caused by COVID-19. We're hosting today's webinar to share our expertise about disability insurance and provide guidance on how COVID-19 patients and survivors can make the most out of this resource. If you are struggling with obtaining disability insurance benefits, we hope the information we share with you today helps you get the benefits you deserve. Before we jump into the discussion with our panelists, I'm going to take a moment to frame the topic of disability insurance. Today, we'll be talking about short-term and long-term disability insurance policies, which are commonly offered by employers as workplace benefits. When a person is unable to work due to their disability, they can apply for income replacement benefits during their period of disability, provided they satisfy the terms of the insurance policy. These policies are governed by the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, or ERISA, which is a federal law that regulates employee benefit plans. These disability insurance policies are contracts, and each one will be written a little differently. That's why it's helpful to have an attorney work with you while you're applying for these benefits or appealing a wrongful denial. Some of the information we share today may be helpful if you're applying for Social Security disability insurance, but if you're particularly interested in that topic, our next webinar will be focused entirely on long COVID and SSDI. So be sure to look for more information about that soon. So first, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Caitlin, then Audrey, then Mark. So go ahead, Caitlin.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Caitlin Barshesky. I am an attorney at Eric Buchanan and Associates, which is a law firm based out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, that specializes in these types of claims. Exactly what Andrew described. We do long-term disability cases, and the vast majority of our cases are governed under a federal law called ERISA. And so we take cases and we're able to represent clients all over the country in federal courts and as well in the administrative appeal stage with the insurance company. And so, yeah, that's what I do. I specialize in ERISA litigation and help with these long-term disability cases every day.
Thanks, Caitlin. All right, Audrey, how about you?
Hi, I'm Audrey Dolomovich. I'm at the same firm as Caitlin. I'm the junior partner here at Eric Buchanan Associates. So we do the same type of work. I do want to add, along with long-term disability claims, we also do private disability insurance. So if you got your policy, your long-term disability policy through not your employer, but you went out and got it on your own as well. But other than that, I think Caitlin covered it.
Thanks, Audrey. All right, Mark.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Dabowski. I am not a member of Eric Buchanan and Associates. I am a member of a law firm in Chicago, Illinois, that has my name in it, Dabowski Law Limited. I've had over 40 years of experience in representing claimants for disability benefits, health insurance, life insurance, and retirement benefits. But the focus of our practice is on disability benefits. As Audrey just said, we also handle individual disability insurance in addition to group disability insurance claims. And because ERISA is a federal statute, like Audrey and Caitlin, we also represent clients not only in Chicago, but in other parts of the country. One of the nice things about federal practice is that the law is ostensibly the same in all 50 states. So if you are familiar with the ERISA law and you're familiar with the disability insurance issues, you should be able to represent clients where they are. And you just need to familiarize yourself with some of the local rulings. But with long COVID, there haven't been too many local rulings yet. So we're plowing ground that really has not been plowed much yet. So hopefully we'll be able to educate the attendees today a little bit more about the issues that they face with long COVID claims. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. And for today's webinar, we will have time for questions during the presentation, so please use the Q&A feature to submit questions for our panelists. If you submit it in the chat, we might not see it, so make sure you use the Q&A function. And Ty is also joining us today to help select questions for our Q&A. So Ty, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. It wouldn't be pandemic patience without a patient. So I've had long COVID since January, getting sick in January of 2020. Pandemic patience is something I'm very passionate about, as I'm one of the, I don't know of anyone, maybe a handful that successfully navigated FMLA, private insurance disability, as well as Social Security disability, which Andrew mentioned would be the next webinar. But it's a tough gauntlet without experts. So I'm anxious to hear what our experts have for the webinar today.
Thanks, Ty. So for our first question, we're going to really dig into this topic of long COVID. And I'd like to hear your perspectives on why long COVID patients are typically facing challenges obtaining disability insurance benefits. What are the challenges that they're running into that are preventing them from getting these benefits? I'm just going to open the floor up for any thoughts on that.
Well, I can take this one. The main challenge is obvious. There is no laboratory test or imaging study like an X-ray or an MRI that can show the presence of long COVID. And for people like Ty, who contracted COVID very early in the process, there aren't even any test results that they can point to that would establish that they have long COVID. So what often happens in these cases is that the insurance companies are very resistant to paying a claim if they can't point to any laboratory studies, or even if you can produce evidence that would corroborate how sick the patient is, the insurance company's next move is to try to pigeonhole the claim as a mental disorder so that they can limit the duration of benefits to 24 months. So that's the initial hurdle that we face with these claims. But let me hear from Audrey and Caitlin as well.
Yeah, Mark, I agree. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think that it's so new. And then you're exactly right that, people in the same situation as Ty might not have a positive COVID test to even refer back to. And that is something that the insurance companies are trying to use against them. I always frame it as how the insurance company frames it, which is subjective versus objective. And they'll say, well, you don't have any objective evidence, which is going to be that MRI or, some sort of objective testing to show it. Whereas, with COVID, everyone has different symptoms, but most of those are going to be what the insurance company says is called subjective. And so that's one of the biggest issues.
Yeah, and I would just add, even though this is a new condition that we're having to learn about. It's not the only subjectively based condition that we've dealt with. It's very similar to how insurance companies will treat clients with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, where there's no single objective diagnostic test that will show that they have it. And so there are historically ways around that argument and ways to overcome that challenge. And so we're kind of leaning on the way cases have been handled for those to move forward and prove cases for long COVID. And then in addition to what Mark said about the mental nervous limitation that they can point to in the policies, some policies also have subjective symptom limitations that are also make it to where they'll only approve you for 2 years and then cut off your benefits. So we have to look out for that as well. And that's another challenge that some clients will face.
These are all great points, and we've got a question from our audience. Julianne has asked, are speech therapy evaluations, neuropsychology evaluations, and vision rehab evaluations considered subjective or objective?
Objective.
Yeah, objective.
Those are some of the most important pieces of evidence that we can get in handling these cases. When we have clients who tell us that their disability is based on long COVID, if they have not undergone speech pathology, we encourage it because we find those records to be particularly useful. Neuropsychological evaluations they're a bit of a mixed bag, because if somebody does produce results on a neuropsychological evaluation that show a cognitive impairment, that's really helpful. But a lot of patients with long COVID, particularly if they were very high functioning in their careers, will test maybe 1 or 2 standard deviations below where they were at before they became ill, which is career disrupting for them, but gets reported as average on the test scores. And the insurance companies will jump on that and say, you tested average, and therefore we don't consider you to be disabled. An interesting point is that the first major reported long COVID decision was a case out of Seattle, Washington called Abrams versus Unum. And that case involved a trial lawyer who had long COVID. And there was a report in the decision in the case that Abrams had undergone neuropsychological testing, which did not show any abnormality. But what the court was able to take from the testing was that built into standard neuropsychological testing is validity testing, to make sure that the person being examined is reporting truthfully. And this test, the validity testing, is not necessarily apparent to the examinee, which is deliberate. And some of the measures are embedded in other tests and some of them are freestanding. But because Abrams had passed all of the validity measures, the court felt that that was just another point that bolstered his credibility. So even a negative neuropsychological test can be very helpful.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback off of that with since we're talking about, a neuropsych, for that, I think what is very important is when you go in for those exams, I've pulled my clients' school records before, their resume, their prior job, because if that testing comes out as, average, I want to show that they were, above average beforehand, so it still shows a decline. And I think that's really important. And you can actually have, hire your own expert that does that analysis to give it even more credibility, to say, looking at their school records, they had great grades, they have a master's degree, a doctorate degree, a bachelor's degree, they had this job that required them to be very intelligent, they would have been above average. They now have seen a decrease in their average. And so that is really helpful in proving disability. As far as the other objective tests, I've also found it helpful in some cases to do a functional capacity evaluation, but make it a 2-day exam. And that is helpful with COVID because one of the main symptoms is fatigue. So when you have long COVID and you're fatigued, you might do really good at the start of a functional capacity evaluation. You're lifting a lot of weight, you're okay, but by the end of that day, and especially the next day, you're going to see that those restrictions and limitations are a lot greater than they were at the beginning of the test, which shows that you wouldn't be able to perform that job, 5 days a week for 40 hours. So that's also helpful. So those would be the other objective things I would add in.
One more question from our audience was that they wonder if cardiopulmonary exercise testing and EEG is successful in providing objective evidence for long COVID.
I can answer this one. So I would say yes, it is, especially for clients who are having a lot of shortness of breath and post-exertional malaise. The CPET test can be really helpful evidence in documenting what those subjective symptoms are in an objective way. So yes, I would say that can be very helpful evidence to get. Also, another one, and I don't know if this question mentioned it, but the tilt table test. Um, Many of our long COVID clients have underwent tilt table test, and which is a way to show your symptoms that are due to heart rate or blood pressure problems, and it's used to also diagnose POTS, which a lot of our long COVID clients end up having a firm diagnosis for POTS as well. And so that's a way to get around that subjective limitation as well if you have this sort of clear diagnosis of POTS.
And one more question from our audience. Pamela wants to know what kind of specialist looks at neuropsych exams and determines the level of prior functionality versus test results that are just subpar?
Yeah, so that would be, a neuropsychologist. And what I do is when you have the neuropsychologist doing the exam, I like to provide that beforehand to the neuropsychologist that's doing the exam so that they can add that into their report as well if they're willing. If they're not, then you can get, of course, get your report, have another neuropsychologist review the report and comment on it. But it's a lot better I think if you can just get it to that same neuropsychologist and have them add it into their report, kind of like a pre-functioning level.
Yeah, I'd like to add a point on this because of something that I recently encountered in one of my cases. My client was referred to a neuropsychologist for testing, and although the neuropsychologist acknowledged that my client had a diagnosis of long COVID, she did not have any experience with long COVID, and she concluded that even though there was clear evidence of cognitive impairment, she attributed it to a somatic symptom disorder, which is a psychiatric condition. And we haven't gotten the final results yet, but that is a serious issue that we're facing in that case because there are some medical conditions where neuropsychologists see a pattern that is associated with the condition, like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease, and the examiner can give an opinion that the test findings are consistent with that type of a process. But if they can't associate it with a particular disease, oftentimes the fallback is on a somatic symptom disorder, which is difficult to address after the fact.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I would add as well, so that is a problem with neuropsychologists. Sometimes if, like Mark is saying, the results aren't in line with one of those conditions like Parkinson's or MS, then it might be attributed to mental nervous, and then you get caught in that 2-year limitation. One thing to consider, and it's a relatively new test that's come out, is what's called a cognitive assessment evaluation. And it's a little bit different than a full-on neuropsychological evaluation. Well, it's very different, but it's more so documenting what your subjective cognitive impairments are, not necessarily trying to link it to a specific disease process, but more so just documenting the symptoms for disability purposes. So that's one other alternative test to consider, and that we would consider sending a client to if we were worried about the neuropsych test results showing or linking the condition more so to a mental nervous one.
So I'd like to add to that speech language pathologists often give sort of mini neuropsychological tests to their patients. And one test in particular we see given by almost all speech language pathologists, the R-bands. It's the repeatable battery of something of neuropsychological status. But that is a standardized neuropsychological test that can yield very useful results.
Thanks, Mark. It looks like a lot of our attendees are having some challenges with their neuropsych evaluations or asking more questions about that. So I hope we answered a lot of those questions today. I'd like to move on a little bit, though, to our next topic, which is how does a person know when is the right time to get the help from a lawyer to help with their disability application?
I can jump in on this one. So I would advise you to get help as soon as possible, especially if you've received a denial from the insurance company. That is the time to get an attorney involved. There's something that I tell everyone because I don't think that it's common knowledge, is that when you go through your appeals and you get what's called a final denial, and then the next step is court. So you no longer have any appeals, you're going to go to court. At that time, that's when a lot of people try to get an attorney. But it's hard to find an attorney to help with your case at that point because the record closes. And so what that means is that when you go to court, you're not able to add in medical records or really develop your case in court like you would like a personal injury case. So it's really important that during the appeal stage, you get an attorney involved so that they can develop the case, so that if you do get that final denial, then they're able to take it to court and hopefully win your case, or at least put the best case possible in front of the judge. And so a lot of people will wait, and I blame that on the insurance company. I think there should be some sort of duty that the insurance company has to tell you, you have a right to get an attorney at this time, and you should, because once the appeals close, there should be some sort of responsibility of the insurance company to say that. But instead, what the insurance company says is, oh, you can appeal. All you have to do is say, I appeal, and we'll go ahead and review your claim again. Well, what they're not telling you is that you need to add in all of your evidence at that time in order to make it a good court case down the road, if you have to get there.
Absolutely, definitely agree. And one of our earlier questions was asking, how do we know all the right tests to get? How do I navigate this really crazy process? And how am I supposed to know all these things? And my point to that is that shows you that you need the help from a lawyer, and you need help from a lawyer who really understands long COVID, so that they can really go through your medical records, identify where the gaps are, and recommend the right tests that you need to give you the best chance of getting your benefits approved to get a strong case.
Yeah, I would add to that, though, that for people with long COVID, they should be enrolled in a long COVID clinic, particularly a university or medical school affiliated long COVID clinic, because they are the most up to date, the most experienced, and will recommend the most up to date testing and treatment for long COVID. And that evidence is just beyond value, because if somebody is just going to their primary care physician, we're just not getting the quality of medical records that we feel we need in order to win a disputed claim involving long COVID.
Yeah, and Mark, I don't know if you've run into this, but I have several clients who are like Ty, and they got COVID very early on, or they never actually had a positive COVID test. A lot of these clinics are requiring them to, I guess, like show proof of a positive COVID test before they're actually accepted into that long COVID clinic. And so I do know that that is an issue. And of course, that's something we can work around, and hopefully you have other treating providers that are supportive. So I just wanted to throw that in there about the long COVID clinics.
So we've got lots of questions coming in. We're gonna keep trying to get to them. But I can assure you that we're not gonna be able to get to them all because we've got a good number. But one of the next things that I wanted to talk to you all about is the concept of the independent medical examination. I hope you can provide some information on what exactly this is, what patients can expect if they have to go through this process, and really why it can be potentially problematic for their claim.
So I can start. So unfortunately, most disability policies allow for the insurance company to send you to what's called an independent medical exam with a doctor that they've selected, who is supposedly independent. But for what you can expect during the exam, you can expect it to be conducted like a normal physical exam. It will probably just last an hour. The doctor will typically review your records prior to the exam, and then will interview you at some point during it to ask you more details about your medical history and treatment. And then the physical exam portion may include some various testing measures, but it's not likely to be near as thorough as a full on FCE or functional capacity evaluation. But in total, it's just likely to last about an hour. And then after the exam, the doctor is going to prepare a report that answers the questions that the insurance company has specifically requested. So if the report comes back and you haven't already hired an attorney and it comes back disagreeing with your doctors or saying that you are not restricted, and that you can go back to work, then that would be a good point to get an attorney involved, because we'll know the best arguments to raise in response to that report. And you will have an opportunity. The law under ERISA requires that the insurance company give you an opportunity to review and respond to that evaluation. So there are several arguments that we know will work, and then ones that aren't as successful. So it's really important to have an attorney who specializes in this type of law, who can identify the mistakes and flaws in the IME doctor's reports. But I know the other attorneys on here might have more to add about this, so I'll open it up to them.
Yeah, I can say plenty. First of all, using the term independent medical examination is a misnomer. The examination is hardly independent. And I assume that Caitlin and Audrey have the same experience that we have, that the insurance companies all tend to have certain go-to doctors who they're going to send patients to, because they have a pretty good idea what kind of a report they're going to get from that doctor. The reality, well, let me talk about the exam, and then I'll talk about the paper IMEs that the insurance companies get. But it's really important, if you're asked to attend an exam, that you do need to attend it. If you refuse to attend the exam that the insurance company has requested, that is grounds for denying the claim, even if you've got all the evidence in the world. So it is incumbent upon the claimant to attend. It's also really important that even if the doctor provokes you, don't get mad. Just be respectful, go along with it, but make notes. If you can have somebody come in with you, that would be best to observe. But if you can't have somebody come in with you, make sure you bring somebody with you to the appointment so you can debrief immediately after, and note things that may have occurred during the exam, such as if the doctor writes in the report that the exam lasted an hour, but you know that the doctor walked in the door at 10 a.m. and walked out the door at 10:15, that if the doctor says it lasted an hour, the doctor is lying. Also, variances from the kind of exams that the claimant is used to should be noted, so that you have some rebuttal that you can present. Insurance companies nowadays, though, generally do not want to do independent exams because either, for instance, Unum, the largest disability insurer, has over 100 physicians on their payroll in different specialties, and you can imagine which way they go in most instances because that's their employer. And even if they don't have the doctors on their payroll, there are organizations that will contract with insurance companies to provide doctors to do these evaluations. And these are just paper reviews where they are not seeing the patient. They're usually not talking to the treating doctor, or even when they say that they're talking to the treating doctor or they're trying to, they often call the doctor at times they know to be inconvenient and demand that the doctor call back within an hour or the report's going to be finalized, or they fail to provide a HIPAA authorization to the doctor to allow the doctor to speak with the retained consultant. And these reports are sort of the bread and butter of disability insurers nowadays. They're often easier to challenge than an actual examination, but expect that the insurance company is going to have a doctor who is writing up these reports. One positive note in this regard that we've seen is that the doctors the insurance companies are going to on long COVID claims know absolutely nothing about long COVID. And as a result, the reports that they write are just flat out ignorant. You know, they'll say things like the musculoskeletal exam was entirely normal, or the neurological exam was entirely normal. Well, of course, those exams are going to be normal with long COVID because it's not a musculoskeletal condition. And while it may be a neurological condition, it doesn't produce the same neurological findings on examination that a condition like MS does. Or they will just say things that are so inconsistent with what the treating doctors are reporting that it's really obvious. And sometimes that can be used to your advantage because when you share that report with your doctor, oftentimes the doctors get peeved that somebody is saying this, particularly if the reviewing doctor is being critical of the treating doctor. And that kind of gives them more of an incentive to write a stronger rebuttal. So those are the issues that claimants face with these exams and with these paper reviews.
And a lot of these issues have come up repeatedly in the claims that I've worked on. And one thing I'm curious about is how are these, biased reports handled when these claims reach the litigation stage? Are courts ready to strike these down because they're not credible, or do they actually stick?
So it goes both ways. We've had a lot of courts that say, oh, it's what we call them an internal file reviewer, meaning a doctor at the insurance company who reviewed and wrote a report and didn't examine. We've seen courts uphold their report. So it's our job to prove that they don't know what they're talking about. They're the wrong specialty. Maybe other courts have, there's case law out there where other judges have said that those doctors' reports are maybe they say the same thing every time or the same format, or they have always found that claimants are not disabled. It's our job to point that out and then to also say, look at all this other evidence that we have, all of this, objective testing, the treating providers who are the correct specialty or who have examined our client and look at their opinions. They should, hold greater weight than the file reviewer opinions.
Yeah, one other point I would add to that, though, is that it may depend on what standard of judicial review the court is going to apply when you're in court. So under ERISA, there are two potential standards of judicial review that are applied. And that's kind of the standard of judicial review is the lens that the judge is looking through. So if the policy contains language that says that the insurance company has the discretion to make claim determinations, that will trigger what's known as the arbitrary and capricious or abuse of discretion standard of review. And judges seem to be predisposed, if they're dealing with a claim under the arbitrary and capricious standard, that they're just going to go with the insurance company. If the standard is de novo, then the court is more likely to give the claim more scrutiny and would be more likely to disagree with the reviewing doctor's opinion.
And I could add how we've seen long COVID cases working out. And the case that Mark mentioned earlier out of Seattle was reviewed under that de novo standard of review. And that, I think, really helped the trial lawyer in that case obtain a successful outcome in court. So it'll be interesting to see how cases turn out for long COVID clients, even under that arbitrary and capricious standard of review. But we're just going to have to wait and see as these long COVID cases progress through the administrative appeals process with the insurance company and move on to court, what's going to happen. But what I can say about the trends is that at first we were finding that the insurance companies were highly reluctant to offer reasonable settlement values for long COVID cases because they would argue that it's likely that people with this condition will get better and go to work, or just that there's no proof that this is a long-term condition. But now that more studies are out and people with long COVID have not gotten better, we're seeing more success with both appeal approvals and with settlements. And specifically in one of my cases, my client's long COVID specialist explained that in his experience of caring for patients with long COVID, he has found that those patients who experience significant fatigue and other symptoms ongoing beyond 6 or 12 months, that it's unlikely that they're going to experience meaningful improvement going forward and that their condition is likely chronic. So we'll see what happens, but I think that that's a really good way to push back against the insurance company saying that it's likely that clients will get better and go back to work soon. So having that strong treating specialist opinion and explanation about their experience with patients with long COVID is very valuable evidence that can be added for these cases.
Thanks all for adding that. One of our questions asks, is a case hopeless if there's no objective medical evidence?
No.
I wouldn't say hopeless, no.
Yeah. You know, if you are handed lemons, make lemonade. And if you have a good treating doctor who's documenting all your symptoms and the symptoms are the same from visit to visit, and there is just no rational reason why somebody would make this up, then there's a good chance that you're going to win the case. You know, there are several cases that have recognized a really important logical point, that somebody who is in the midst of a successful career is highly unlikely to walk away from their career and fake an illness and a disability unless they were genuinely impaired and could not go back to that work.
Yeah, I would just add in, I know we've talked a lot about objective testing, FCEs, IMEs, all of that. But if you have treating provider support and your records are consistent, I think that is what makes a good case. I mean, if you have treating providers giving specific restrictions, limitations, and not just saying, my patient is disabled and cannot return to work, that doesn't do much for a case. But if that treating provider is saying, my patient can only sit for 1 hour during the workday before needing to lie down for 3 hours and rest. Those are what we call specific restrictions and limitations, and those are very powerful for a disability case.
One thing that does come up quite frequently as well is a person's occupational classification. So their job might be considered sedentary or light work or medium work or heavy work. I think that comes into play a lot when those activities and limitations are assessed. And sometimes we see that the insurance company inaccurately categorizes a person's classification. So they might say they're sedentary when it's actually light work. What steps can a person take to correct that with their insurance company?
Yeah, so this is something that our firm is deeply invested in, because we noticed a while back that a lot of these claims that were being denied could have been easily won based on a vocational issue. So the policies all have different language about, what usually it's 2 years of own occupation. So you're disabled if you cannot perform your own occupation. After that, it usually switches into an any occupation stage. The policies are different with their language about what any occupation means, but there's a misconception there. It's not any occupation, right? The policies are going to say something like based on education, experience, training. There might be what's called an earnings requirement. So even if a job is identified, you have to earn a certain amount for that job to actually qualify as a transferable occupation. So once we notice this, it is now, our firm's policy that unless there is an exception, we do not do an appeal without getting a vocational expert involved. And especially if, we've reviewed the insurance company's vocational report and we think that the job is misidentified. So you need to make sure that the insurance company has your accurate job description, because sometimes they'll get something from your employer, especially if you worked for a big company. They'll send over a job description that is not even what you were doing and could even be the wrong title, or maybe it's the right title but wasn't what you were doing. So we also will do a sworn statement with our client where our client describes exactly what they were doing at their job. And then we'll take that and the job description and then all of the restrictions, limitations that we've gotten from your treating providers or any of the independent providers that, FCE, IME, all of those. We send that to a vocational expert and they're able to tie in, this is what their job was, this is the level that it was performed, sedentary, light, medium, heavy. And then they look at the restrictions and limitations that you have, and they say specifically, what about that job that you're not able to perform anymore, showing how you're disabled from performing that occupation. And then they will also go into a transferable skills analysis to see if there are any other jobs that are transferable based on your policy language. So it's a very powerful tool to have a vocational expert involved in your case, even at the appeal stage, because that's the only stage you can get it.
I'll double down on that. We also make extensive use of vocational consultants because it's so important to clarify what the job duties are. And also, we found that in most instances, the insurance company's transferable skills analysis is grossly defective and needs to be rebutted. And in fact, there's case law that says that if you fail to rebut the insurance company's vocational report, woe unto you. The other thing that we found is sort of a systemic issue, is that the insurance company will only look at the physical requirements of a job and completely ignore the cognitive elements of a job. So, you can have somebody who, let's say, was the chief financial officer of their company and obviously was involved in a highly cognitively demanding occupation, crunching numbers all day long, and they're experiencing severe brain fog on account of long COVID. And the insurance company says, well, you can sit for 6 hours a day and handle the duties of a sedentary job. But if it doesn't take into consideration the mental requirements of the job, then what the insurance company has produced is just complete garbage.
Another aspect that's interesting when the insurance company is looking at an own occupation that you used to do that's very highly cognitively demanding and then does a transferable skills analysis is that we see a lot of times they fail to do sometimes they fail to do one at all, but to look at the gainful wage requirement in the policy. And a lot of times, if they do one, they inaccurately report what the average earnings of the jobs they've identified that they say you can do are. And so, having a vocational expert involved to look at those numbers and the gainful wage requirement in the policy is very helpful and can be a very clear way to win a long-term disability case just on this vocational issue alone.
Definitely. I'm looking through some of our questions to see if there's any more that we can quickly address as we approach the end of the webinar. But while I'm doing that, I want to ask our panelists, just generally when things reach the litigation stage, when these claims go to court, what are your observations about how these are ending up, how courts are treating these claims? And, is this a hopeful situation for patients when they've reached the end of their administrative appeals and they have to go to litigation, or is it just the beginning of a longer and more difficult journey?
I think Mark addressed one of the main points very, very early on, is that there's not a lot out there just yet, but I think within the next couple of years, we'll be seeing more of how courts are looking at long COVID cases. I think that the most important thing that everyone wants to keep in mind is to have your best shot, you want to make sure that your case is developed before you get to court, before that final denial. That is going to give you your best chance in court. So while we're waiting on some more case law to come out, I think, that would be the best plan of action, is just making sure you get all of that really good evidence in the record.
One of the worst aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic is that we can't get decisions out of courts. We've had cases now, I have several long COVID cases that have been fully briefed for months to over a year, and we're not getting decisions on these cases. And until we start getting decisions on these cases, we're really not getting the guidance that we need that might help us prepare our cases even better so that they don't get to litigation, or if they do, that we've shaped the record more appropriately to satisfy what the judges are looking for. And that, every lawyer meeting I go to, the number one complaint that lawyers have is we can't get any decisions out of the courts.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. I have several briefed and ready for a decision as well that we've been waiting months and months for a decision.
One of our first questions asked, when cases reach this stage, do they often settle instead of going all the way to court? What's the split in your experience?
I have not settled a long COVID case because the insurance companies aren't willing to put value on any of my cases. So we just brief the cases and ask the court for a ruling.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I always tell my clients, we don't go into court expecting a settlement. Let's just go ahead and expect that we're briefing it, going all the way to the end, and hopefully winning it that way. So I think it's important to understand that, the insurance companies are also watching for case law on long COVID to come out, and they are playing a little bit of tough, like they're being tough, and not willing to offer as much money as they would, maybe on another case with a different condition. Hopefully that will change as we get more good decisions out. Hopefully Mark wins all of his cases that are briefed, and hopefully I win all my cases that are briefed, and so does Caitlin, and we get some really good case law out there that helps everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just add one small point at the end of this. One of the factors that is affecting whether a case could potentially settle is the disposition of the Social Security claim. And our experience dealing with the disability insurance companies is that they're talking out of both sides of their mouths. On the one hand, they're saying, we don't think your client is disabled at all. And on the other hand, they're saying, we think your client is so disabled that they're going to qualify for Social Security disability. So we're going to discount the value of the claim based on the Social Security award that we expect your client to get. Social Security has been very parsimonious in approving long COVID claims. So we just can't negotiate under those conditions because our clients would be shorted the value of what their claims are worth.
We got some more questions here we got for everyone. Someone asked, they will be losing their high paying job in the fall because of long COVID, and they'll be getting a lower paying job. If it's a 20% or more reduction in pay, do they qualify for short-term and long-term disability?
Well, that's dependent on their policy language. So it would be really important to review your policy before taking that job, just to know what you're going to get.
And it's also dependent on what the new job is and how closely it relates to the old job.
Okay. I think I'd like to ask the panelists generally, what advice do you have for long COVID patients just going through this process right now? What words can you offer them of reassurance or support that, they're doing the right thing, they have a good chance of getting these benefits?
I'll say what I advise all of my clients. Focus on your health first, and the benefits should fall into place. But make sure you're getting the best treatment that you can get, and we'll scoop up the documents from the treatment, and we'll make the best use of them that we can. And we believe that we'll be able to put together a convincing argument to cause the disability insurance company to approve the claim. But if you focus on the benefits first rather than your health, you're kind of setting yourself up for a potential lose-lose situation. So health comes first.
Yeah, I was going to say my number one piece of advice would be don't give up. Continue treating. Don't give up the fight. Get help early on, from an attorney, someone to help you with your long-term disability claim so that they can worry about making sure that you have the right evidence in the file, and so that you can keep working on hopefully getting better and treating with your provider.
My advice is the same. And along the lines of relying on your treating doctors and the advice of your attorneys, I would say to maybe keep a log of your symptoms. There are apps out there that are designed to help document the symptoms that you're experiencing on a daily basis. And courts have said that this is valuable objective evidence of disability. So the earlier you start documenting your symptoms on a daily basis, the severity, the frequency of them, I think that can also be very helpful evidence for your disability case. But like Mark said, focus on your health, follow your doctor's recommendations for treatment, and let us worry about the rest.
Thanks for that great input, everyone. I wanted to ask, this has come up in a couple questions. There was a National Academies report released, I believe earlier this month, about the definition of long COVID. And I wanted to see just if any of you have reviewed that report, if you have any thoughts on if that will impact disability cases. And if you haven't read the report, that's okay. I think I have some thoughts of my own that I can share.
I have not reviewed the report. I've been keeping up with the literature, both the lay literature as well as some of the medical literature as it's been coming out in some of the more important peer-reviewed journals. But I think that what I've gleaned from all of that is that long COVID does not manifest the same way in any two patients, and it has really puzzled the medical community, which is not surprising since COVID-19 was a novel coronavirus. So there is a lot of research effort and more uncovered every day, and the more that's learned about long COVID, then the likelier it is that we can help our clients prove their cases.
Yeah, and I will say it just brought up another point from what Mark said, is that during the appeal stage, a lot of the times we'll pull those articles and journals and studies and submit those with the appeal as well, so that we can reference back to those in our briefs in court if needed. And also it's in hopes that it educates the claims handler at the insurance company who's reviewing it, and makes it more difficult for them to try and deny the claim.
Well, I can share my thoughts on the NASAM report. That report is something that I participated in. Some of the people with pandemic patients participated in. So I'm familiar with the process they were going through, and it was really oriented towards defining long COVID. And where I don't believe that will really have much of an impact on disability claims is because what the insurance companies are going to continue demanding is the objective medical evidence. And, that report didn't provide any new information for us to say, this is the right objective evidence that would diagnose this condition, or that's the right objective evidence. And so we're really still in a situation where we're looking very closely at the symptoms and the limitations that are caused by those symptoms. And in a lot of ways, we're really looking past any long COVID diagnosis specifically, because that's ultimately not something that's going to be super helpful in winning the case, because it doesn't really say a whole lot about what a person's limitations are. So for that reason, I'm not too optimistic that report specifically is going to offer any new, just help in these cases, but it was interesting nonetheless. And so I see that we're really close to the end of our time together. Any other thoughts anyone wanted to share as we close out? I really want to thank you all for joining us today. There will be a recording of this webinar posted. We will send an email with a link to that when it's available. But I'll turn it back to our panelists for a final word, and then we'll close.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for, watching this today. I really hope this was helpful. I try to answer some questions as I saw them pop up in the chat, but I did not get to even 20% of the questions. But if we can help in any way, please feel free to call our office. We're Eric Buchanan Associates, and hopefully I can answer your questions that way. But thank you, everyone.
I'll echo that. Thank you everybody for attending, and I agree. I hope that this presentation was helpful. And as I think Audrey said a little while ago, don't give up hope.
And finally, I will add that I, for one, am excited to see these long COVID cases move forward, and I'm hopeful that they will be successful, and I'm excited to join the fight and advocate for our clients who are a part of this group who are experiencing symptoms of long COVID. And so like Mark said, and Audrey, don't give up hope. We're here for you if you need our help, and I look forward to it.
All right.
Hey, Andrew, I might just add quickly from the patient perspective, one thing that was kind of critical in my path, and everyone's journey is different, is I went to HR and they highly recommended I file for FMLA. The lawyers could tell you better than I, but I understood it as it's much more difficult for them to fire you as an employee if you filed for FMLA. Then my next step was then filing for short-term disability and subsequently long-term disability. But I also didn't rely just on long COVID, especially given I was very early on. There were a lot of sub-diagnoses that I had that helped my case and other medical conditions that helped, my approval.
Thanks for sharing that. And thank you again to all of our panelists. Thank you to our attendees for tuning in. And we'll see you on our next webinar focused on SSDI and long COVID. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.